Chelsea never had a human name, or at least if she did, she no longer remembered it. She was born in a time when names only mattered if you left a legacy, and in the world of immortals, her legacy was her power. Vampires were predators by nature, individualistic, selfish, but she could change that. She could turn loyalty into submission, love into indifference, fear into devotion. She was the invisible glue that held the throne of Volterra together, and yet, no one saw her. No one spoke of her with the fear that Jane or Alec inspired. No one looked at her with the reverence they gave to Demetrius or Felix. But Chelsea knew the truth. She knew that the Volturi would not exist without her. She had not always been part of them. Before Volterra, before Aro found her, she had belonged to another coven, a small one, insignificant. But back then, it had meant everything to her. She remembered them as blurry figures in her mind, voices that had once been important, faces that had once mattered, family, or the closest thing a vampire could have to one. But loyalty was an illusion when someone like her was near, because when Aro found her, when he sensed the reach of her power, he gave her no choice. "You are exactly what we need." And Chelsea could not resist, not because they forced her, but because her own gift turned against her. Aro severed her bond with her old clan and created a new one. A stronger one impossible to break. And so, without war, without blood, without even a conscious decision, Chelsea became Volturi, and she never looked back. Centuries passed. She learned to perfect her gift. Bonds were fragile, like threads that could be broken with the slightest touch. Love could wither, loyalty could change hands. It was all a matter of pulling the right strings. The Volturi used her with surgical precision. If a vampire defied the law, she could weaken their connection to their clan. If someone hesitated, if someone was tempted to betray, she reinforced their devotion. Aro never had to force anyone to follow him, because Chelsea had already done it for him. No one knew, no one understood, but everyone who served the Volturi, every single one of them, was hers, and none of them suspected it. But then came Eleazar. Chelsea had worked on him for decades. She had strengthened his loyalty, woven his connection to the guard until she believed it to be unbreakable. But Eleazar left. He had done what no one before him had managed. He had severed his bond with Volterra, and that terrified her. Because if Eleazar could do it, maybe others could too. And if someone else discovered how to resist her, what would happen to the Volturi? Chelsea did not tell Aro. She did not want him to know she had failed. She did not want him to know that perhaps her power was not absolute. But since Eleazar's departure, she began watching the others more closely. And she saw it. The cracks, the small fractures in some members' loyalty. Felix was obedient, but he did not care for Aro. Demetrius was lethal, but only because he had no other choice. Jane, Alec, Renata, they all believed in Volturi's supremacy. But what if one day they stopped? Chelsea did not sleep. She could not. But if she could, she would have had nightmares about that thought. When news of Renesmee reached Volterra, Chelsea felt something different. Aro summoned her to assess the situation. "My dear, I want you to watch the guard more closely," he said in his usual polite tone. Chelsea nodded, but deep inside, she knew she already was, and there was something she could not ignore. Something was changing, something that even her gift could not stop. The time of the Volturi was running out, and for the first time in her existence, Chelsea was not sure she was on the right side when that moment came. Chelsea had never felt fear before. Not the kind of fear that freezes your body, that makes you question everything. She had always been the invisible architect of the Volturi's power. She had always been necessary. But for the first time in centuries, as Aro and his guard walked toward Forks, she was unsure if she could control what was coming. The confrontation with the Cullens was inevitable. Renesmee was something new, something beyond her understanding, a bond she couldn't manipulate. But what unsettled her wasn't the child. It was the allies. Too many vampires, too many wills united by something she hadn't reinforced. When she looked at the Cullens' witnesses, she felt something she shouldn't have felt. Emptiness. There were no strings to pull. She couldn't break those alliances because she hadn't created them. They were real loyalties, born from trust, not from manipulation. And for the first time, Chelsea understood the true power of the Cullens. They didn't need someone like her. They didn't need to force anyone's loyalty. They didn't need her at all. Aro tried his usual diplomacy. He tried to soften the conflict, to sow doubt among the witnesses, and Chelsea did her part. She extended her gift over the crowd, trying to plant cracks to weaken the bonds that had led so many to side with the Cullens. But it didn't work. She couldn't break their unity. They had already chosen. And worst of all, in that moment, Chelsea realized that she had chosen too. When Alice arrived, when she showed her vision of the future, Chelsea saw everything crumble. She saw the terror in Aro's eyes. She saw the first spark of doubt in Caius. She saw Marcus's expression, and she knew he had been waiting for this for centuries. And what Chelsea felt was not relief. It was freedom. Because, for the first time, the invisible threads she had woven for centuries stopped mattering. The Volturi were not invincible. They were not gods. And Chelsea no longer wanted to be their tool. When the Volturi retreated, Chelsea didn't say a single word. But inside, she had already made a decision. It wouldn't be today. It wouldn't be tomorrow. But one day, she would leave. And when that day came, she would make sure they could never force her back. Maybe at last, her own will would be hers.